It started small, like everything that ends does. A missed text, a voicemail she never got, a dinner rescheduled for no reason he could clearly explain. She told herself not to overthink it. After all, he still kissed her forehead every morning, still reached for her thigh at red lights, still asked her if she'd eaten that day. But love, she'd learn, doesn't disappear in absence. It dissolves in routine, in the way someone can look straight through you and still say your name like they mean it. She was already vanishing before he told the first lie, before he told her, the new her, the one with the cropped hair and easy laugh, that she didn't exist. Her name was Claire. She learned that, eventually. Claire, with a C, like clean slate, like cleared out, like cut the woman I used to be out of the picture and never mention her again. But in the beginning, Claire didn't know she was stealing someone's life, and she didn't know that the man holding her hand had once promised forever to someone else. Or maybe she did. Maybe that's what made her hold his hand harder. Either way, I became a story that stopped being told. No one said my name in the halls of our building. The doorman who used to nod at me stopped making eye contact. Our mutual friends posted pictures of him with her, smiling, new, untethered, and not once did anyone ask, where did she go? It's terrifying, isn't it? How easy it is to unexist. He never said, it's over. That would have been too human, too accountable. Instead, he became a magician, a man who sawed me in half and never bothered to put me back together. I remember the exact moment I realized I was gone. It was late. The kind of late that makes everything feel more honest, more cruel. I was curled up in a sweatshirt of his I hadn't returned yet, watching the hours crawl past midnight, trying not to text him. It had been 5 days since we spoke. The doorbell rang. No message, no warning, just a small box on the welcome mat. Inside was my necklace, the one he had unclasped from my throat 100 times with lips pressed to my collarbone like a prayer, the one I left on his dresser more times than I could count, always knowing it would end up back around my neck like a promise. There was no note, just the cool glint of metal in a velvet pouch, like an apology too ashamed to speak. It felt like being spit out. And I did what women like me always do. I held it. I wept. I imagined 1,000 ways to respond and did none of them, because there's no conversation after you've been returned like a borrowed item. He didn't ghost me. He deleted me. Softly, skillfully, like a man wiping fingerprints off a weapon he swore he never touched. He told her I was gone, told their friends I'd moved, told himself that he'd been unhappy, that it hadn't been real, that I had always wanted more than he could give. Maybe that last part was true, because I wanted honesty, and he only wanted to be adored. But now I am here, still breathing, still burning. And the thing about being erased? It makes you memorize yourself better. I know the shape of my rage now. I know its weight and color, and how it feels pressed against my ribs at night. I know what it means to be discarded, and still refuse to crumble. I know how it feels to stand in the center of your own absence and say, no, not today. Not like this. You don't get to make me your vanishing point. You don't get to write the version of me that disappears, because I am still here, and I remember everything. Grief makes you meticulous. You begin taking inventory, not of what's been lost, but of what was stolen. The stolen time. The stolen tenderness. The stolen version of yourself you only became for them. Smaller, softer, easier to hold, and easier to forget. She walked through the apartment like a curator of her own extinction, noticing what had changed and what hadn't. A ghost doesn't rattle chains. it notices misalignments. The misfit mug on the shelf. The picture frame where her photo used to be, now filled with something neutral. The kitchen towel she bought on a whim with a lemon print, still there. Still folded. Absence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it's residue. The little things are the ones that scream. Her scarf was gone from the hallway hook, but the scent of her still clung faintly to the coat she'd forgotten in the back of his closet. And it hit her, suddenly, that he hadn't thrown it out. Not because it meant anything, but because forgetting is different from removing. He hadn't burned her out of his life. He'd just let her rot quietly in the corners. That's what made it worse. A clean break can cauterize. But this? This was slow, surgical, like emotional frostbite. He stopped loving her at the fingertips first, then the limbs, then the core. By the time she noticed, the damage had been done. She pulled open drawers as if testing herself. How much of me is left here? The answer, of course, was never enough. Her toothbrush, gone. Her earrings, not where she left them. A note she wrote on the back of a grocery list tucked in the drawer beside the stove, still there. Her handwriting slanted and quick. The final word, always, circled twice. God, the arrogance of that word. Of promises we make when we think love is a contract, not a gamble. In the bedroom, she stood still for a moment and listened. Silence has a sound. It's not peace, it's a missing, a hollow echo of what once filled the space. She could almost hear herself laughing there, at a joke he made once. Something stupid, something warm. She could almost hear the way he used to say her name when he wanted her attention, slow and stretched out, like he enjoyed the syllables. Baby, he'd called her more often, but her name? That was rarer. Sacred. And now? Abandoned. She slid open the nightstand drawer, half expecting nothing. Instead, she found her hair tie. One single black loop coiled in the corner like a fossil of intimacy. Is there anything more intimate than the mundane, than the objects no one notices but lovers? She held it in her hand, thumb tracing the stretched out center, and thought, he missed this. Not because he didn't care, because he stopped looking. That's what being unseen really is. It's not being ignored. It's being unwitnessed. She sat down on the edge of the bed, their bed, once, and tried to remember the last time they slept in it together. Really slept. Not just coexisted beside each other, not just passed out after a long day, but slept like it meant something. Like the body beside you wasn't a stranger. She couldn't. That memory had been replaced, overwritten. Maybe with Claire, maybe with silence. She reached into her purse and pulled out the necklace, the one he'd mailed without a word. Its chain was knotted, delicate, as if it had curled into itself during transit. She didn't untangle it. She didn't put it back on. She just stared, and for the first time in weeks, she let the anger bloom. It came quiet, not loud, not a storm. No, this was weathered. It didn't rage, it settled into her chest, into her bones, into the parts of her he thought he could scrub out. You do not return a woman like a package. You do not erase someone who kept the best of you, but that's the danger of being loved by someone who doesn't know how to hold permanence. They confuse leaving you intact with leaving you untouched. He thought she would stay folded, stay quiet, stay grateful. Instead, she made a list, an inventory of everything he took, and everything she'd come back for. Not for him, but for herself. It was the weight that undid her. Not the necklace itself. It was light, a thin strand of gold no thicker than the truth he refused to tell, but the meaning it once carried. That small, quiet gravity of things worn daily, touched absent-mindedly, kissed during mornings when love still spoke in glances. Now it lay in her palm like a relic excavated from a life someone tried to bury without ceremony. He had mailed it back in a plain brown envelope. Not even a box, not even wrapped. No note. No, I'm sorry. No, it's over. As if to say, you know what this means. And she did. The absence of words was the message. Silence can scream when delivered with intention. And this silence was surgical, meant to cauterize, to close the wound without cleaning it. He wasn't giving her closure. He was giving her garbage, the final sweep of the kitchen floor before the party guests arrive. The last trace of her, tidied away, shipped back, as if she were some subscription he forgot to cancel in time. And the necklace. God, the necklace. It wasn't expensive, not in the way that counts to people who measure worth by carats. But it had meant everything once. A gift for her birthday. She remembered how he had fastened it around her neck that night in a hotel room they had no right affording, his fingers brushing her skin like punctuation. You wear it so well, he had whispered, like it was always meant to belong there. Now it belonged nowhere. Now it sat in her hand like a corpse, gold still gleaming, but lifeless. As if the metal itself knew it had been discarded. As if it remembered where it had rested, and was ashamed. She wanted to throw it. She wanted to mail it back again, until someone answered. But she didn't. Instead, she walked to her vanity, opened the smallest drawer, and laid it down. Not with reverence, not with nostalgia, but with precision, the kind that women learn when they've been wounded and refuse to let it turn to rot. She stared at it for a long time, and then, slowly, deliberately, she slid the drawer closed. Let it sleep. Let it rot on its own time. Let it remind her of who she was when she thought love was measured by what you were willing to give up. Because she had given it all. The versions of herself that bent to make him comfortable. The quiet compromises. The slow starvation of desire for the sake of keeping the peace. She thought of Claire again. Of the way women like her come into a story mid-scene, unaware they're playing a role written by someone else's denial. Did Claire know about the necklace? About the promises made on the nights that still whispered through this apartment like perfume? Or had he rewritten the story entirely? There was no one before you. I was never really happy until now. Lies told in soft lighting, in whispers that mimic intimacy but lack the marrow. Men like him don't cheat with bodies, they cheat with memory. They take the truth and bend it until it fits inside the life they want. They silence the parts that don't flatter them, and they return what doesn't serve the new narrative. Like a necklace, like a woman. But here's what he forgot. She didn't need him to name her to exist. She could be unclaimed and still be undeniable. She could be unloved and still be unerasable. And so, later that night, she took the envelope he'd sent, tore it neatly down the middle, and fed it piece by piece into the sink's flame. One of those slim, useless candle lighters she never used unless the power went out. She watched the edges curl, watched the barcode blacken, watched the return address. His name burn like scripture, but she left the necklace. She left it where it could see her every day. Because grief is not about forgetting. It's about witnessing what remains. And she wanted that necklace to see. To watch her dress for someone who looked at her. To feel the vibrations of her laughter when she remembered how to be loud again. To sit there, still and small, while she rebuilt her sense of worth one unapologetic morning at a time. Because she was not something to be mailed. Not something to be returned. And absolutely not someone you could forget. There are parts of a woman that do not soften, even when the love fades. Even when the door closes without ceremony. Even when the name he used to say like a prayer becomes the one he teaches himself to forget. There are parts that stay, and she was learning to name them. It wasn't healing, not yet. This wasn't redemption, and it damn sure wasn't forgiveness. This was recognition. A slow, deliberate reacquaintance with the pieces of herself he had ignored, or trimmed down, or smoothed over to make her easier to hold. Because there is an unspoken violence in being easy to love, you learn to bend, to silence the part of you that asks, "What about me?" You smile when it's inconvenient, bite your tongue when it trembles with truth. You trade power for proximity, believing, if I am gentle enough, small enough, grateful enough, he will stay. But he didn't. He left anyway. And the worst part? He made it look clean. No fights. No final confession. Just subtraction. Like editing a sentence down to its barest bones, he removed her as if she were an adjective. But she was the whole damn paragraph. Now, walking through the spaces they once shared, she could feel it, the residue of her. The places he hadn't managed to scrub clean. The bathroom mirror still fogged where she used to hum in the shower. The coffee mug with the tiny chip on the rim, the one he never noticed, but she always rotated to the back of the shelf. The soft indentation on the side of the bed that still remembered the shape of her sleep. He could try to replace her. He could bring Claire in, move furniture around, repaint the walls, but what remains refuses to fade. Grief isn't always tears. Sometimes it's defiance. Sometimes it's the refusal to disappear. Sometimes it's walking past the cafe where you used to wait for him, chin in your palm, eyes scanning the sidewalk, and not crossing the street. Not anymore. Now she walks in, orders the same drink, sits at the same corner table, and does not flinch when memory slides into the seat across from her. She lets it sit, lets it speak, lets it ache. But she does not leave, because she is done giving him the gift of her absence. He stole her softness, mistook it for silence, and then pretended she had never been there at all. But she was... oh God, she was the reason he learned to sleep through the night again. The reason he came home to something steady, warm, real. She was the woman who caught his lies before he could finish them, who loved him anyway, who believed, foolishly, selflessly, that being loved back would be enough. And now she knew better. There is nothing lonelier than being unseen in plain sight. Nothing colder than a love that only loves the version of you that never complains. But she is not here to be palatable anymore. She is not here to be digestible. She is not a story he can edit in hindsight, or a name he can omit when someone asks, "Have you ever been in love?" He was with her, and that will never not be true. So she begins the quiet rebellion. One photo left on her Instagram, unapologetically visible. One conversation with a mutual friend, casually laced with, "Did he tell you why we really ended?" One night at the same bar where they first kissed, where she orders a drink and doesn't care who sees her sitting alone. She is not haunting him, she is reminding him of what he tried to erase, and whether he feels it now or years from now in a moment of silence beside a woman who still doesn't know his full story, it will hit him. She didn't fade. She refused, and in that refusal, she becomes something unignorable. Not a ghost, a reckoning. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. Not him. Not his friends. Not even the version of herself that still sometimes checked his social media at midnight and whispered, "What if?" into the dark. She didn't ask for an invitation because women like her, women who have been erased, rewritten, replaced, eventually learn that the most radical thing they can do is show up. No warning, no apology, just presence. It was a charity gala, something they used to attend together. She knew the rhythms, the wine list, the laughable silent auction items, the curated conversations. She also knew he would be there, and probably so would Claire. She had nothing to prove, and that's what made it powerful. Her dress was black, not morning black, knife black, a kind of fabric that shimmered when the light hit it wrong. Or right, she chose it on purpose. Let it drape over her body like armor that remembered how to be beautiful. Her hair pinned up, her lipstick unapologetic. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She was the scene. The lobby was all marble and intention, warm lights casting long shadows across people pretending to matter to each other. She moved through them like a secret everyone could feel, but no one could name. Then she saw him. He was holding a glass of red, one hand in his pocket, half listening to a conversation he wasn't really invested in. And Claire, of course, was beside him, laughing too loud at a joke he probably wasn't telling. She watched him from across the room. She wanted to feel something sharp. Wanted to feel that old, familiar grief rise up like it used to. But instead, all she felt was this strange, elegant stillness, as if her body had finally accepted the truth. You don't belong to him anymore. So she turned, walked past him, not toward him, but not avoiding him either. A cut made by presence alone. She saw the flicker in his eyes before he caught himself. The way his posture shifted, spine stiffening with recognition. Claire followed his gaze, and that was it. 3 seconds of acknowledgement stretched across years of silence. She didn't stop. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Women like her don't come back for permission. They return because they never left. Because a man can forget your name, lose your number, untag your photos, but he can't undo the way you once held his worst parts and still kissed his shoulders like they weren't heavy. And now, he gets to remember because there she is, thriving in the version of herself he didn't have the courage to imagine. Later, as the night folded into itself, she felt his gaze on her again. Across the ballroom, his eyes clinging to the hem of her presence, like a man who dropped something and is just realizing he may never find it again. She let him look. She let him ache. But she didn't give him more, because returning isn't always about reclaiming. Sometimes, it's just about reminding someone what they lost when they were too busy trying to feel new. She danced with a stranger, let herself laugh too loudly. She sipped champagne and told a story about Rome. She left the gala alone, but not empty. She didn't need closure. She needed witnessing. And now he had seen her, alive, whole, unapologetically unforgotten. Let that live in his chest. Let that be the version of her that lingers when Claire has gone quiet and the wine has run out and there's nothing left but memory and the faint perfume of regret. She didn't come back for him. She came back for the part of herself that thought she needed to stay gone. And that part? It had just walked out of the ballroom with her head held high. Every woman who's been made into a ghost eventually learns to haunt. But she didn't want to linger in his halls like some tragic leftover. She wasn't here to scratch at the windows of his conscience or wait for his guilt to grow teeth. She was here to close the story, but not the way he thought. He had written her ending for her, hadn't he? Neatly, quietly, a vanished woman. An inconvenient love he folded into a drawer beside the old receipts and spare cufflinks. No rage, no confrontation, just a silence so thick, so absolute, he mistook it for erasure. But silence is not the same as surrender. And what he didn't know, what men like him never know, is that the women they unwrite are always keeping notes. She had drafted her own ending the night he returned the necklace. She just hadn't told it yet. Until now, it came in the form of a message. No dramatics. No second chances. Just words. Clean, surgical, and meant to leave a mark. Subject. For the record, body. You didn't break me. You buried me alive and mistook the dirt on your hands for closure. I hope Claire brings you peace. I hope she never has to wonder why the silence hurts more than the lies ever did, and if one day she asks about me, don't lie. Tell her I was the one who stayed too long, who believed too deeply, who saw you fully and loved you anyway. Tell her I left when I remembered who I was before you made me forget, and tell her I wrote the ending. She didn't send it, of course. She didn't have to. The writing was the release, because this was never about revenge, never about making him pay. It was about naming herself again, in ink, in breath, in the quiet miracle of survival. She took the necklace one last time and walked it to the river. It was dusk, violet sky yawning open, and the water moved like memory, slow, relentless, deeper than it looked. She let it slip through her fingers, the gold chain catching the last light before sinking into the dark. Not as a symbol, not as an offering, as a final sentence. You cannot return a woman like a gift. You cannot forget a fire just because you've walked away from its heat. And you cannot write her out of her own life just because the story stopped flattering you. She had always been the author. He was just a chapter she survived. And now she was writing new pages, messy, honest, God willing, full of mornings that smelled like coffee and freedom, not apology. Afternoons where her name was spoken with reverence, not revision. Nights where she didn't wonder if she was too much, too loud, too complicated to be chosen. She would love again. Someday. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to love with both feet planted on the ground. No more balancing acts on his tightrope of affection. No more begging for the kind of tenderness that should come freely. She was not an echo. She was not the aftertaste of regret. She was not the girl you almost loved. She was the girl you will never forget.